We're going to do CI/CD on the Microsoft stack. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to start with a project. I put this project in GitHub. It's just a file new project in ASP.NET. This is a full framework, though that really isn't important to this demo. I created an application and I created some tests together with it. So we want to build this. We're going to demo two products today. One is Teamcity. The other one is Octopus Deploy. I work for neither of them. But I think these two projects are really great. Let's build a CI/CD pipeline. Teamcity we'll use for the CI piece, the build, and Octopus Deploy we'll use for the CD piece, the deploy. Let's start off. Create new project. We could go point it at GitHub and pull in that repository automatically. I'll do it manually instead. I'm going to say this is .NET Web Application. And then I want to create a build configuration. The build configuration then ties into the project. Again, I could pull it from GitHub. I'll choose to do it manually instead. Let's pull in .NET Web Application. And we'll create that new build. Next up, we need to attach it to that version control system. And since I didn't pull it in straight from GitHub, I get to choose from my version control system. So which one do I want? Well, in this case, it's a Git repository. So I'll choose Git, and I'll say create. And it will now prompt me for where is the URL of my Git repo. Now I have a local Git server running, so I'm just going to plug in that. Net Web Application. And here's my fetch URL. I could put in other URLs if I wanted to, a branch specification filter if I wanted to, and other details. I think that's good for now. I'll create that VCS root. Now, Teamcity knows how to get at my source control. Next thing, I'll go after build steps. Let's go add a build step. I'm going to choose a Visual Studio build. I will say this is a Visual Studio build, and I will point it at my solution. Now I can click in here, and it will actually open up the Git repository and start to pull in content from my Git repository. So there's the solution file. I'm going to choose to build in Visual Studio 2015 as opposed to 2017 because those are the Visual Studio build tools that I have installed, and I want to build the release version. Now I've got that build step in place. Because I have this unit test project, and because in that unit test project I actually pulled in xunit.runner.console, I now have the ability to run my unit tests from the console as well. So I'm going to add a build step, and I'm going to say this is a command line. I'm going to go grab the path to that xunit. Let's say this is xunit tests. It is an executable. There's that path, digging into the packages folder to run that exe. And we will run this command line. Now this command line is the path to my test executable, my DLL that I want to test. And then -nunit says write the results to an nunit formatted file. So I'm going to save that step. And before I do any of these, I want to be able to restore the NuGet packages so that I can pull in all of my dependencies. So I'm going to add another step. This will be a command line, and I'll say NuGet restore. Here's the path to NuGet. And that one is restore. Now the NuGet restore probably should happen before I build or run tests. So I'm going to reorder this build step, and I'm going to put NuGet first. And I now have a build. I want this build to happen anytime something happens in my source control system. So I'm going to add a new trigger that says this should kick off anytime somebody does something in the version control system. And I could choose to create a quiet period. Is your Do you have a developer that likes to commit lots of things at the same time and you want to build all of them in one piece? You could have a quiet period that waits until they're done. With Git, because we commit and then we push, typically by the time we're pushing, we're done. So I'm going to say, let's not use a quiet period. I've got that version control trigger ready to go. And I'm going to add one more thing. I'm going to add an XML post process, XML report processing. Now this is going to go look for that NUnit style test in that directory, star.test.xml. That's where I wrote that. So because I wrote that test file into place, Teamcity will be able to pull that in and expose it in the dashboard. I now have that build ready to go. And so let's come back to the dashboard and let's run that build. Now this is what's really cool. We set up the Visual Studio build. We set up to run unit tests. We did a NuGet restore. We could optionally do other steps as well. In here, it's going to tell us, hey, I'm doing step 1 of 3, and it'll show us that build status. If we click through, we actually get more details as well. Who triggered the build? In this case, it was me. Here's the date I triggered the build. We could go into changes and see the details of, what's the Git hash or the Teamcity build number, TFS build number. Build log is really interesting because we can start to dig into the actual console that happened at the time. So it's telling me that, oh, the test passed. Because this build is now done, I can also switch to the Tests tab, and here's each of those tests, how long each test took to run, and what order they ran, and how long. And it'll also tell me if tests are flaky, if they flip on and off. So this build is now green. That's great. We have done the CI part of our story. We have built in a very automated way. We now have a repeatable build. Well, let's take that to the next step and see if we can do a deployment. Now to hook Octopus deploy together, any questions so far? Yep. That's a good question. Does the build log show us in real time what's happening? So let's flip over to that build log and let's see. It's going to show you exactly the output. And the cool part, once it finishes, it will collapse that step. You can drill into it. But while it's doing that step, it'll keep that expanded. That was a great question. Thank you. So we want to link Teamcity and Octopus deploy together so that Teamcity can push content into Octopus deploy. I'm going to come into Octopus deploy into my logins, and I'm going to create an API key. And I'll call this API key Teamcity. And it's going to generate a new one. Notice right here it says API keys cannot be retrieved once they are created. This is the only time I will see this. I'm going to come in here to Teamcity, and I'm going to go into the root project so that this parameter will be available to all projects. And I'm going to specifically craft a new configuration parameter called octo key. There's that value. I'm going to change this not to be normal, but rather hidden. And I'm going to choose to make it a password. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to hit save again. I'm going to close this box. That is the last time I will ever see that key. In both systems, it's stored quite securely. Yep. Mm-hmm. Agreed. And that is kind of weird. I just created an API key within my account. So would I create another user that is not myself and put the API key in there? I probably would, because if I leave the company, the build stops. That's kind of bad. And so, ideally we have an account. But these accounts also allow me to log into this dashboard so that I can see all of the particulars of Octopus Deploy. And so I really do also want my account in here as well. I don't want to just create one account that we all share, because sharing credentials is awesome. So now I've got Octopus Deploy and I've got Teamcity linked together so that Teamcity can start to do things in Octopus Deploy. I love this wizard. When you start up Octopus Deploy, it very carefully walks you through all of the pieces. The next task that we need to do is create environments. Let's go create environment. I will create my first environment, and I will call this environment dev. Now into my environment, I will add a deployment target. They call it deployment target, not server, because, well, what is a server in a cloud? What is a server in an offline package drop? But for our purposes, let's say it's a server. And I'm going to create a server on localhost, discover all the settings. Let's also name it dev. And then here are the roles. I can specify what type of roles this is. So perhaps it's a website, perhaps it's a database, perhaps it's an API. I could even name this based on products. This is just freeform, whatever I've chosen it to be. In this case, I chose it to be a website. Here's the thumbprint of the web server. Here's the thumbprint of the deployment agent. I'm getting SSL going both ways, connecting between them. I'm going to save that. And now I have an environment. Let's add a second environment. Let's add a test environment. And we'll add a deployment target into test as well. We'll also make that a listening tentacle. This test server will also deploy the websites. And now I have two environments. I have the dev environment and I have the test environment. Back on the dashboard. Environments are complete. And now let's talk about packaging. What Octopus Deploy that is really elegant is it will create a single package, happens to be a NuGet package, and it will take that package and deploy it to each environment. As it does that deployment, it can transform the config files, XML files, JSON files, and so I need to create that one deployment package that will go to all places. It's not a regular NuGet package, kind of like Chocolatey isn't a regular NuGet package. Rather, it's a superset. It's a NuGet package that happens to have a particular structure in it. So into my project, I installed the Octopack NuGet package. And because I installed the Octopack NuGet package and also installed the Octopack plugin into Teamcity, I can come in here to my build configuration, into my build steps, and I'll go into my Visual Studio Build, and I have this Run Octopack button. That will generate that NuGet package. The Octopack version, I want to set that to be build number. Build number. And because that build number now is, 1, 2, 3, I probably want to make that build number a little bit more descriptive, more semver-ish. I could choose to publish this package right here to Octopus Deploy, but I don't really want to publish it right away. Instead, I want to finish this Visual Studio Build test. I want to run my unit tests, and then I want to very specifically publish it here. So I'm going to go into the general settings for my thing, and the build number format right now is just build counter. I'm going to say 1.0 build counter. And the benefit now is it's not quite semver, but it's approaching that. Anytime I do a minor version, anytime I kick off a build, it's going to increment that minor version and publish a new version to Octopus Deploy. As I do major version bumps, I can come in here and I can adjust that version number, and it will continue on. So I've got that build number set, and now let's go get Octopus, or let's go get Teamcity to deploy to Octopus. So I'm going to add a build step. This one's a command line, and this one I'll say octo push that NuGet package into Octopus deploy. There's that octo.exe and this command. Now this command goes and grabs that octopack NuGet package, web application 1.buildNumber.new package. That's the one that octopack build created for me. It's going to pass it to localhost 8090. That's the URL of my Octopus server. And the API key is using that octo key, that API key that I saved previously. It's not going to show it to me. It's not even going to, it'll just automatically pass it through calling that API. So I'm going to save octo push, and I'm going to add a fifth step. This fifth step is creating the release. So I'm going to create another command line piece. This one will be octo deploy, and this executable will create this release in Octopus deploy. Now it's going to create a release for this .NET Web Application project, and it specifically says deploy to dev. It passes in those similar things like the URL of the Octopus server and the API key. It's going to deploy that .NET Web Application. I'm going to hit save here, come back to my dashboard. We talked about packaging. We talked about publishing a package. Let's create that project, that .NET Web Application project, and define the deployment steps. So here's that .NET Web Application. And here, now I want to define my deployment process. I'm going to add my first step. We have lots of target things here. I could deploy it to Service Fabric. I could run a batch or bash script. I could create a Docker container. In our case, let's deploy it to IIS. So I'll call this deploy to IIS. And I will run on web roles. So we created that web role previously and said each environment has a web role associated to it. So it's going to say, I'm deploying to dev. Let me go find all the servers that are dev servers that have the web role. And it'll deploy then to that web role. The package ID is that the name of that NuGet package that I published in from Teamcity. And by default, it's the name of the project. I want this to be an IIS website. The website name, I want it to be Net Web App. But now if I deploy it to dev and I deploy it to test, then I'll have two websites with the same name. So I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to reach in here to the environment, the variables, and I want to pull in the environment name. So I'm going to use that both for the website name and the application pool name. So now I'll have a Net Web App dev and a Net Web App test. I need to do a similar thing here for the bindings. If I was going to deploy to different servers with each deployment, I would be okay with putting them both on 80 or 443, perhaps adding certificates. In this case, I don't want it to deploy to port 80, because if both sites are trying to run on port 80, then that doesn't work. Really, I want it on port 8000 plus something. Well, we can't actually do math here, but what we can do is come back in here to say environment, and I can choose sort order. Sort order is a numeric one, 0, 1, 2. So this is 8000, port 8000. So if I had more than 10 environments here, I might run into some concerns here, but just with these two, then this is perfect. I have two environments, I have two different port numbers, and away it goes. I can configure other pieces of IIS as well. I'm going to make this anonymous authentication. And this is particularly cool. These XML transforms. Unlike a traditional build where I run my web config transforms at the build portion, so building to dev and building to test would be a separate build. Instead, here in Octopus, because I'm running those transformations here on deployment, in effect it's just copying the raw web config together with the raw transforms. And I can transform all of the XML files. It will do the web config automatically. I can also come in here to configure features, and I can do the same thing for JSON files as well. So any interesting configuration moves I want to do, I definitely can do there. And I'm going to save that configuration. Notice that nothing in that process was specific to dev or test. I used variables to be able to pull in the particulars that I wanted from each environment. So now that we've got Teamcity ready to go, or now that we've got Octopus ready to go with our deployment, let's come back to Teamcity and let's fire up a new build. Any questions so far? Yes. Why wouldn't I pull in the Octopus deploy tasks into Teamcity?
Yeah, because Teamcity has the create release deploy
I could have done that, and you're right. Here in the
I was just wondering if there's better performance.
here in the build steps, I could, because I have the Octopus plugin, I could have chosen one of these, Octopus deploy, release, publish packages. I tend to like the command line better because it makes my build a little bit more portable. Ideally, I would actually have a batch file and have Teamcity just run my batch file or bash script that would do each of these steps. So my goal is to get to that automation point, and typically the lowest common denominator for that automation point is the command line. So can I run msbuild from the command line? Can I run octopack from the command line? Because at that point, whether I'm choosing Teamcity or Jenkins, the build is the same. It gives me a little bit more portability. But you're right, I did avoid that when I did this. So we see that our build went green, and we see something interesting about this build. Instead of it being build number 3, it's actually build number 1.0.3. 6 tests passed, and as we look at the build log, we also have that octo push and we have that octo deploy. Here in Octopus, we see that now there's that deployment that went out to the dev environment. Pulling up IIS, here's IIS before I began this talk, and now if I refresh, now I see that there's my application. Firing up my website, it'll take it a bit to JIT. Now I've gotten my release. Any questions so far? So that was awesome. We got to dev. I want to promote it to the next environment. So I go into Teamcity and I create another build. Nope. I can come in here to Octopus deploy. I can open up this release and I can say promote to test. As I create those different environments, I create a mechanism for identifying the sort order of those. I'm going to say promote to test. Deploy now. And that same mechanism that we actually didn't see previously is going to kick off where I see the tasks that it's doing, and I can either drill into the particulars, the raw logs, or I can look at kind of that prettier, just the highlights of the logs, and we see that that deployed. I now have 1.0.3 in dev, and I have 1.0.3 in test. I'm going to refresh IIS again. Now I have that test website, and it is on port 8001. Here's that site running in test. I can take that same NuGet package that I built once, and I can now promote it to a QA or a staging environment, and I can promote it again to production. With Octopus Deploy, I'm able to do that CD part of it in a really elegant way, With Teamcity, I'm able to do the CI part in a really elegant way. We got from, where people are in Visual Studio clicking right-click publish, and we hope that they built the right branch, to a mechanism that is very durable and very repeatable in lots of ways. Any questions? Thanks, this was a lot of fun. You can find this presentation on my blog at robrich.org or tweet me at rob_rich. That's the only name that I have that has the underscore, rob_rich. If you find the guy without the underscore, can you tell him I want my Twitter handle back? So definitely tweet me there if you have questions that last longer than this. Thanks for coming.